The 4th of July is supposed to be loud. Fireworks, barbecues, families together. A celebration so deeply embedded in American identity that it is almost impossible to imagine it as the backdrop to something horrific. But in the early morning hours of July 4th, 1990, inside a quiet house in St. John, Missouri, a working-class suburb just outside St. Louis, 18-year-old Stacey Lannert walked downstairs while her father slept on the sofa, picked up a rifle, and shot him. Twice. When police arrived the following morning, Stacey initially told them she had come home and found her father dead. She didn't know what had happened. But Lieutenant Tom Schultz, a detective who had spent years investigating child sex crimes, sat with her gently and asked a different kind of question. Not about the shooting, about the family. And Stacey Lannert fell apart. What she told him that day was a decade in the making. And what happened next? The trial, the verdict, the sentence, the appeals, the governors, the 18 years, became one of the most debated criminal cases in Missouri history. Because the question at the center of it was never really about whether Stacey pulled the trigger. She admitted she did. The question was always, why? And whether the law was ever equipped to hear the answer. Stacey Lannert was born on May 28, 1972, in St. Louis, Missouri. She had a younger sister, Christy, born 2 years later. In her early childhood, Stacey later described her father, Thomas Lannert, as her hero, her protector, the parent who paid attention to her when she felt overlooked. She called him like Superman. He was the one she ran to, the one she trusted completely. When Stacey was around 8 years old, the same year her parents' marriage began to deteriorate, everything changed. Tom and Stacey's mother eventually divorced, and her mother relocated to Guam, thousands of miles away. The girls lived intermittently between parents, but spent significant time with their father. After the divorce, according to Stacey's account, Tom's drinking escalated sharply, and the abuse began. Stacey would later testify that her father began sexually abusing her when she was 8 years old, progressing from touching to rape, occurring as frequently as 3 times a week over the following decade. He threatened her. He told her that her mother knew and didn't care. He made her believe that no one would believe her, and that speaking meant making things worse. So she stayed silent. Meanwhile, Christy endured a different kind of abuse, violent beatings, usually when Tom was drunk, beginning when she was in the 1st grade. 2 little girls, 1 house, 1 abuser, and a wall of silence that lasted 10 years. By July 1990, Stacey was 18. Christy was around 15 or 16. On the night of July 3rd, something happened that Stacey said she could not allow to continue. Thomas Lannert became violently confrontational with both daughters. During the altercation, he reportedly tore telephones from the walls, cutting off any means of calling for help. Then he took Christy into his bedroom and locked the door. Stacey stood outside that door and listened to her sister scream. The 2 girls eventually fled the house temporarily, but they had no car, nowhere permanent to go. In the early hours of July 4th, around 4:15 in the morning, they returned through a basement window to collect Stacey's puppy, which had been left behind. When Stacey came back inside, she saw the rifle. Her father was passed out on the living room sofa, drunk. She later described the moment not as a calculated decision, but as something that had been building for 10 years and finally broke through. She said she was terrified he would hurt Christy the way he had hurt her, that she couldn't let it happen again. She raised the rifle and fired. The first shot struck Thomas Lannert in the shoulder, shattering his collarbone. It startled him awake. Stacey closed her eyes and fired again. He died. The following day, Stacey called 911. She initially told dispatchers she had returned home and discovered her father's body. She claimed not to know what had happened. Police arrived at the house on July 4th, 1990. It was Lieutenant Tom Schultz who sensed that the story Stacey was telling wasn't the complete one. Rather than approaching her as a suspect, he approached her as someone who might have something much heavier to say. He asked, gently, whether there had been abuse in the home. Stacey broke down completely. She confessed to the shooting and described, in detail, the years of sexual abuse she said she had suffered at her father's hands, and the specific events of the night of July 3rd that had pushed her to act. She told Schultz that she believed her father was turning his abuse toward Christie and that she had acted to stop him. Schultz believed her. His last words to Stacey Lannert that day were a promise. "I'll be there for you." But what happened next was beyond Schultz's control. Because the case was not his to prosecute, Stacey Lannert went to trial in October 1992, more than 2 years after the shooting. The prosecution's theory was stark and transactional. Stacey had killed her father for money. Thomas Lannert's estate was valued at nearly $500,000. In the period before his death, Stacey had forged his name on checks and used his credit cards. Prosecutor Bob McCulloch argued that the abuse narrative was a fabrication, a calculated story designed to avoid a murder conviction. Stacey's defense attempted to present evidence of the abuse, including testimony about battered child syndrome. But the trial court severely restricted how that evidence could be used. Crucially, the jury was not permitted to receive a self-defense instruction. Under Missouri law at the time, self-defense required an immediate, imminent threat. A sleeping man on a sofa, the prosecution argued, posed no imminent danger. The full scope of the abuse, the decade of rape, the events of July 3rd, the screaming behind the locked door, was never fully placed before the jury in the context of self-defense. Christy Lannert, who corroborated the abuse, had separately pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in connection with the case and received a 5-year sentence. Her testimony was therefore constrained. After a week-long trial, the jury convicted Stacey Lannert of first-degree murder. Under Missouri law, first-degree murder carried a mandatory sentence of life without the possibility of parole. The judge sentenced her accordingly. Then, in an unusual move, he personally recommended her case for clemency. The system had convicted her. The judge who presided over that conviction believed she deserved to go free. Stacey Lannert spent the first years of her sentence filing appeals. Everyone failed. Then she began seeking clemency from Missouri's governor, the only route left. Her case gained quiet but significant support over the years. Advocates, attorneys, people who had read the case documents and believed the justice system had failed her. Lieutenant Tom Schultz, the detective who had believed her from that very first conversation, kept his promise and publicly advocated for her release. But the political machinery moved slowly, or not at all. Governor Mel Carnahan appeared supportive of her clemency petition. He died in a plane crash before leaving office and before signing any order. His successor, Governor Bob Holden, did not respond to the petition. Governor Matt Blunt took office in 2005. In January 2009, Blunt's last days in office, he announced the commutation of Stacey Lannert's sentence, alongside that of another woman, Charity Carey, who had killed her abuser under similar circumstances. His statement read, "After an exhaustive review of the facts in both cases, I am commuting the sentences of Stacey Lannert and Charity Carey, who suffered extensive abuse before they took action against the men who raped them and subjected them to other horrible physical and emotional abuse." Stacey Lannert walked out of prison on January 16, 2009. She had served 18 years. She was 36 years old.